Hi. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice break. You're welcome to learn some property. So it's often said that students make an impression of a professor within the first minute. So I'm going to try my best to do a good job. Would anyone have any objection if we start class at 9:30 instead of 9? No. I've taught before at 9. People always come in late, a few minutes because of traffic. So we'll start at 9:30, from 9:30 to 11 normally. Any objections? So ordered. Okay. So that's the good news. This will make it a little bit easier because people always trickle in late for 9 a.m. classes. So welcome. My name is Josh Blackman. I'm very glad to have you all in, proving the point 10 seconds in. I'm glad to have you all in this class. Property is a different class than you've taken in your first semester in law school. In torts, you have a restatement. In contracts, you have the UCC. In criminal law, you have this model penal code. You've always been taught that there's some, unified body of law. Maybe it modifies a little bit here or there by states, but there's something consistent. Property is not like that. Property has developed over the last 1,000 years, and I'm not exaggerating, in a very slow and deliberate fashion, such that there are a lot of different rules and a lot of different principles you're going to have to learn that aren't going to make a lot of sense. And the case today we assigned, why the heck are we reading about Indians and savages and other stuff? The way property developed is through case law. More than any other class you'll have, this is developing. And much of our class is actually premised on history, how this doctrine evolved. Property 1 is not what you think property is. Everyone thinks property is real estate and mortgages and buying property. None of that. We'll save that for property 2. The goal of property 1 is to teach you what property is and how people go about acquiring it. Not buying it, acquiring it. And that's actually very, very different. So I assume by now that everyone has a copy of the book. Yes? Okay, good. We will not be using Stanley. All the assignments, as I said in my initial email, will be on the class blog. So you go to joshblackman.com. That's my blog. There's a link for classes. If you click the link for classes, you see property 1 right over there. I'd like you to check this page every day before class. I usually update it around 7 a.m. Or 6 a.m. around classes start. And so first of all, you'll see here, it's probably too small to see, but there's a link for the syllabus. And below that will be the post for the day. So first I'll click on the syllabus to show you how to walk through this. I am very good about keeping on schedule. The schedule of assignments I put here, we will stick to this. I've never once fallen behind. This way there's no mystery whatsoever about what I expect from you. You'll know exactly what you want. So on any given day, you'll know exactly. So for example, today, we're going to cover this. We're not going to leave. We'll leave exactly 10:30, but we're going to cover everything. I don't fall over. In terms of participation, the way I run class is by calling on everyone. And I do this very simply. I'll start with one person, and I'll go up and down each row. And everyone gets 1 or 2 or maybe 3 questions. And the reason why I do this is to make sure that you're all paying attention. You need to know what the person before you said in order to answer your question. It may sound difficult, but it actually flows very quickly. This is a big class. It's about 80-something people. I can probably call on about 70 of you in a given class. And I've done this consistently. I've had classes of 50 where people get called on twice, so they go up and down every row. It actually flows fairly well, and I think you'll come to appreciate it. In terms of the actual class examination, there's a final exam at the end. I'm telling you this in the first day of class. I post all of my old exams. They're all there, along with the A+ answer. People ask me the first day, how to prepare for the exam? Look at those. My exams are very consistent. I don't change very much. So you can look at everything. I'll pass the roll sheet around. I have the seating chart going around. Keep track of your own attendance. Please don't email me the last day of class saying, hey, how many absences do I have? Because it tells me you want to skip class. Keep track of your own attendance. I don't want to see those emails. Again, the class itself is very, very laid out in advance. The first few classes discuss what is property, how do we acquire it. So for today, how do we acquire land? In a class on Tuesday and the following Thursday, how do you acquire animals, right? Very basic stuff. How do you capture stuff in the wild like oil and gas? How do you capture ideas? We move on. How do you have property in yourself? Do you have property rights in your organs? Then we move on. How do you find stuff? Everyone remember when you're a kid, finders keepers? That's actually a property rule. You know, if you find something that doesn't belong to one, can you keep it? Okay. One note that I want to flag here in the very first day. I don't know if your other teachers have made a point, but South Texas has been trying to make a midterm a bigger component of your education. This didn't really used to be this way. This year, your year, I guess, lucky enough, is somewhat of a change. And the reason why is because it's somewhat unfair to expect a student to have 100% of the score riding on an exam. They walk in the last week of class and they have no idea what to expect. So I will give you a midterm. My old midterm, my old exams are available. And I'm going to do it fairly early in the semester, and I'd like to explain why. I tried this last semester midway through, and I gave it roughly halfway through the semester. And what I found was virtually no one had actually studied for it. It was very unfortunate. No one had made their outline. I don't expect you to be much different. Maybe you'll surprise me, I hope. So the goal here is to teach it after only about 8 days of class. There's not a lot of material to learn. The focus, therefore, is how you think, not what you've learned. In other words, I can't expect you to actually study and outline and do everything you're supposed to do. So there's a small quantity of knowledge. You can test me what you know, not what you can recall. The exams are all open book. You can bring whatever you want. Not going to help, okay? Now, it won't help you at all. Now, the exams are graded. I will grade them. Under our grading policy, we are not allowed to incorporate the midterm into your final exam. But what I can do is adjust class participation. So if you fail the midterm, which is possible, I hope no one does, but if you fail the midterm, I can reserve the right to decrease your score by, a third. So if like a B to a B minus, which that is within our power. That gives you just enough incentive not to blow it off. Although I sincerely hope you take it seriously. I can show you the numbers. Last year, the scores in the midterm were very close to the scores in the final. I tracked this. So people who did poorly in the midterm did poorly in the final. With some exception, though. The students who did poorly in the midterm and came to talk to me and work with me went up. I had one student went from a D to a B. That's a very significant jump. Another student went from a C to a B+. So that's there. Other students who never bothered come talking to me, they stayed at their poor grades. So it's really in your ballpark. The midterm is supposed to be a wake-up call to let you know how you're doing, and you can take advantage of me that I'm here to help you. If you don't, then you'll get your final grade, and I can't help you. It always happens after the semester's over. A student who I've never seen have classes, "Hey, professor, hey, Josh, I want to come look over my exam." It's like, who are you, right? I want to see you outside of class. I do. I mean that. There are 80 of you here. Maybe 5 of you will come to my office. Maybe 6 or 7, but it's a small number, okay? So after the midterm, we move on to some of the more complicated aspects of property, of how to structure land for people, how to transfer them, but this is all medieval stuff. It's nothing modern that you may know, okay? And then we move on. In the latter course, we do discussions of marital property, and then we move on to leases, and then we finish with landlord-tenant relations. So again, we have 28 classes. Everything's laid out. There should be no mystery as to what we're covering on a particular day. I don't want anyone to be surprised, but you'll need to be on call every class because I go up and down the rows, and whether you're prepared or not, I'm going to call on you. Okay, and if for whatever reason you're not prepared, I'll come back to you with a question that would not have required you to do the reading. So even if I skip over you, you're still vulnerable. Okay. One of the goals I also try and do in this class is to always provide you the background of the cases, to humanize them. I find it's a very good way of learning. So I always have lots of pictures, the people involved, the judges, the pieces of property. You'll remember this far more than words. Most of you are visual learners anyway. So I always try to make things very graphic. In every single lecture note, in every single blog post, it's probably too small for you to see. It's a very small resolution. I have a link for the lecture notes, which all appear here. So during class, I will, type stuff, right? These are meant for me, instead of writing the board, which I don't particularly like to do, but these are meant to convey certain high-level ideas. These are not a substitute for your own notes. These are meant to supplement your own notes. All these are available by clicking that link, so you don't need to frantically type this down during class. It's all available afterwards. A lot of students print these out, and they bring them to the exam. These are for your benefit. So anything you want to know, you can ask me, and I'll try and put some notes up there. There's a lot of stuff in this class that's actually word intensive, so those sorts of notes will help you. Also, I record all my lectures. They're on YouTube. In fact, it's streaming as we speak. Immediately after class, the videos are available. Now, this is not a substitute for coming to class. I take attendance. The attendance rules apply. Furthermore, I'm recording from here, not there. So your colleagues who don't speak very loud, who sit in the back, will very likely not be picked up. So very often I'll ask a question and there'll be dead silence on the video. So you cannot rely on the videos as a substitute. But if you do miss class, I strongly encourage you to watch the videos. And if you want to be really proactive, all of my videos from last year are also available. I've had students who actually watch me in advance. They say, wait a minute, you didn't say this. No, you didn't tell that joke and all the other stuff. So it's kind of creepy. But you're welcome to, and that will give you a heads up. And then you'll know what to expect. Okay? All right, I think that's all the overview stuff. Any questions? Yeah. Say your name, please.
My name is Jaime Perez.
Jaime?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
The classes that you're recording, like for example, this one right now, when do you upload those?
Immediately.
Oh.
Immediately after class, are available to watch. It's automatic. So Google Hangout just streams it, and it goes online immediately to YouTube. And there on the syllabus, there's a link to the YouTube channel. It's available, the same day, so you can watch them right away. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Rachel Sachowski.
Thank you, Rachel.
For the book, I noticed you had written something specific about the one from the bookstore. Could you explain that?
Okay, yeah. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So the book you have is the publisher a couple of years ago tried to do something funny. So has anyone ever bought a song on iTunes or Amazon Kindle? This may surprise you, but you don't actually own that. You actually only have a license to that song. So for example, a number of years ago, people bought the book 1984, George Orwell classic, on their Amazon Kindle. And they woke up one morning, the book was gone. How could it be? I bought a book on Kindle, it disappeared. You only have a license to it. And Amazon had a dispute with the publisher, so they yanked your license. So a couple of years ago, ironically enough, the publisher of the property book decided that they did not want to sell students the books. They only wanted to license them the books. And at the end of the semester, you were obligated to give it back. Obligated. So I found out about this, and I made a little bit of a stink. And I was like, what the heck are you doing? There's a property book. What do you mean you can't own a book? Like, oh, well, they keep this online version, which no one really cares about. So they eventually changed it so that now you have an option. You can buy the book to keep it, and that's at a higher price point. Or you can do this, it's a rental, basically. Rent it at a lower price point. The choice is yours. I'm actually glad you have this choice. But they initially they made this very vague as to what they were actually doing. It wasn't clear that you were only licensed. It wasn't clear they were renting it. They said, oh, you can license the book. What the hell does that mean, right? So now you have a choice. So I think the book and online, they have the two different price points. I don't think the bookstore actually sells the other version, but if you go to the Aspen website, you can do the online version. If you want to save 40, 50 bucks, it's your call, but at least you have that option. But I'm assuming everyone has the book, no problem. Well, speaking of the book, anyone from New Orleans or Louisiana? Okay, you're up first. So this is easy, I promise. Turn to page 699, please, for the book. You're just going to read something. Don't worry. This is easy. I always get people with that every year. You knew it, too. You knew it was coming? If you had watched the video, you would have known that was coming. Like, I'm not from New Orleans. No. And what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah. Okay. I'm going to ask you in a moment to read this. So this is way out of order in the book, but I always like to start here. And as I'm sure many of you know, the Louisiana Territory was acquired by the United States in the Louisiana Purchase from France by President Jefferson. So anytime you want to do some sort of acquisition of property in the Louisiana Territory, you need to trace back the history. You know, Smith bought it from Jones, Jones bought it from Bob, et cetera, and eventually you get all the way back to the beginning, which was the Louisiana Purchase. But for real property searches, that is not sufficient. You have to go back even further. So this letter, which is probably fake, but the book publishes it anyway, asked a Louisiana lawyer to trace the title of some land before 1803, before the Louisiana Purchase. Now, Sarah, right?
Yes.
Sarah, just read what it says, gentlemen, please.
Gentlemen, I am in receipt of your letter of the 5th of this month inquiring as to the state of the title prior to the year 1803. Please be advised that in the year 1803, the United States of America acquired the territory of Louisiana from the Republic of France by purchase.
Okay, I'm going to stop you. I'll come back to you. Okay, ready? So I like this letter because it explains the various means by which property can be acquired in varying degrees of civility, I suppose, right? So first, in 1803, the U.S. purchased Louisiana from France. They actually paid for it. It was money. It was actually an acquisition of property. There was two countries and they bartered, okay? All right, Sarah, continue, please.
The Republic of France previously acquired title from the Spanish crown by conquest.
Okay, so here's a second mode of acquiring property, and it's discussed in the Johnson case, which is conquest. France and Spain didn't agree to buy it in, peaceful terms. They fought a war, right? I mean, at one point, Texas was involved in wars between France and Spain. That's why we have those 6 flags in Austin. Everyone know that the 6 flags over Texas is the 6 flags, the 6 countries that have owned, or including Texas itself, which have owned the republic. Okay, go on, please.
Spain acquired title by virtue of the discoveries of one Christopher Columbus,
Genoese, from Genoa, Italy.
Who had been duly authorized to embark upon his voyage of discovery by Isabella, Queen of Spain.
Okay, stop right there for a second. Okay, so we already have purchase, we have conquest, and now we have discovery. Christopher Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue, right? He went there and he discovered this land. He didn't have to conquer it, he simply saw it, land ahoy, right? All right, go on, please.
Before granting such authority, Isabella, a pious and cautious woman, obtained the sanction of His Holiness the Pope.
Okay.
Pope,
keep going.
Okay. The Pope is the vicar on earth of Jesus Christ, the only Son and heir apparent of God. God be with Louisiana. Go
Tigers, right? No. I think actually Les Miles might have written that last line. But this is a very good chronology, right? Because it explains in large degree how property is acquired. So the U.S. bought it from France. France conquered it from Spain. Spain discovered this uninhabited land. And the trip of Christopher Columbus was inspired and motivated by the Pope, who at the time had to basically sign off on any major deal worldwide. And of course, the Pope derives his authority from Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Therefore, God made Louisiana. Right. But there's something missing in this history. Notorious. What's your name?
Carlos.
I like your shirt.
Thank you.
So, first they have Kamala too, huh?
Yeah.
Figures. So, what's missing, Carlos, from this history? What's not present in this chain of title?
Maybe the fact that it was actually settled already by the
Yes, it was settled. You know this, right? France sold to the U.S. Then France conquered Spain, and Spain just discovered it. Well, had the land not already been discovered? Had the land not already been settled? Had there not already been people there? And of course, as Carlos said, there were. The native people, the Aboriginal people, the Indians were there. They'd been there for centuries. And this is a very good transition to the very first case, Johnson versus McIntosh. So what's your name? Florencio. Why do you think this lawyer didn't see fit to mention that Columbus may have encountered some people on his trip to the New World?
Well, according to the first case, it didn't matter.
Why did it not matter?
Because they didn't, the settlers didn't discover the land, so they didn't have right to it.
Yeah. So one of the consequences of Johnson v. McIntosh, which is why it's the very first book, first page in your book, is it discusses the very root of property in America. Right? Where and how did the American settlers and the colonists, and then later the states, acquire this vast stretch from sea to shining sea? Okay. All right. So any questions on the Louisiana thing? All right. So let's move on to Johnson. So before we get started, right, I'll teach you a trick that you probably never paid much attention to, right? So the name of the case is Johnson versus McIntosh. Okay. Without knowing anything about this case, ma'am, what's your name?
Lauren Davis.
Lauren, thank you. Lauren, without knowing anything about this case, who lost in the lower court? Who lost in the lower court? Without knowing anything about the case, I'll give you just two names. You guessing? Okay. So every case you will read in law school, with very limited exception, is an appellate case, right? You don't read decisions from trial courts. You read decisions from courts of appeals. You read decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court, whatever, state Supreme Court. How does a case, Lauren, how does a case get to the U.S. Supreme Court or a court of appeals or any appellate court? Why does the case go there?
Because the person who lost
Doesn't like it.
contested.
Yeah. The reason why a case goes to the appeals court is because someone lost and doesn't like it. So, Lauren, who is the one filing the appeal? Yes. Whoever's name comes first is the person who's appealing, right? Johnson is bringing this appeal against McIntosh. So, Lauren, who lost in the court below? Johnson lost in the court below. You should have learned this the first day of school, but it's a very simple trick of figuring who the heck the parties are, because often the case never actually explains who is who. It's often difficult to parse this together. And then, Pam, what's your name? Norma. Thank you. So who is victorious in the lower court? McIntosh. Okay. But now, just because we know that Johnson lost below and McIntosh won below, that doesn't necessarily tell us who the plaintiffs and the defendants are, right? Because in the appeals court, the names often get flipped. But in the trial court, it's always plaintiff versus defendant, right? Plaintiff versus defendant. I'm suing you. What happens if the plaintiff loses in the lower court? Then the defendant appeals, and it flips. So let's just say, for example, in the trial court, McIntosh sued Johnson. McIntosh may have been the plaintiff. He wasn't. But let's pretend. Had McIntosh been the plaintiff and he won, it would be flipped. So if you ever get confused about who is who, look at the sequencing of the names. It's a tip. I promise you it will come in handy. It's surprisingly useful because cases don't always say who's who. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so what's your name?
Ryan.
Ryan. Okay, so what was the nature of the dispute? Why was this case in court?
I guess they were arguing over who has the right to own the property.
So who were the parties, right? Who was Johnson, and who was McIntosh?
McIntosh was the property owner, and then Johnson was the buyer.
Where did Johnson claim that where did Johnson's claim to the land arise from? Why did Johnson think that he owned this land?
I think it was because he purchased it from the Indians.
Okay, good. Okay. Johnson claimed the land under a sale from the Indians. Okay. Johnson claimed the land under a sale from the Indians. And by the way, we're talking about a tract of land. I think of a map here. It's in modern-day Illinois. So these are pretty sizable claims of land. These are very big pieces of property we're talking about. These aren't small things. So Johnson claimed the land under a sale from the Indians. And what's your name? Arusa, thank you. Where did McIntosh claim that he acquired the land from?
I think it was, like when the United States got the land from England, I believe.
Good. So who would have sold it to him?
Government.
The government, Congress, right? McIntosh claimed the land under a sale from Congress. Okay. And here we have, my friends, the quintessential property dispute. Virtually every question that I will ever ask you in any class involves two people laying claim to the same piece of property. Virtually everything I'll ever ask you, look at any of my exams, you have person A, you have person B, and they both say, wait a minute, that's mine. And they go to court to resolve that. Why is it that every question I ask involves these sorts of conflicts? Well, because if there was no conflict, there would be no court case, right? People don't go to court when they agree and work stuff out. Every single case I give you will be some sort of dispute over the ownership of some piece of property. And it's going to be submitted to the courts to decide who has the stronger claim to the land. And that's exactly what we have here. Johnson says, hey, wait a minute, look, my ancestors bought this land from the Indians, from these tribes. It was a valid sale. McIntosh comes and says, wait a minute, no. The U.S. government sold it to me. I bought it from the Congress. My ancestors bought it from the Congress. This is my land. And they sue each other. Johnson, who bought it from the Indians, sues McIntosh, who bought it from the government. Everyone understand the facts at least, right? Good. Any questions on that? So this case is then submitted to the courts, and it's appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we have a decision by none other than Chief Justice John Marshall. You have common law after this, I'm guessing? Have you been assigned Marbury versus Madison yet?
Yes.
So you have a double dose of Marbury on your first day, Marshall on your first day. I teach common law after this as well, so I have common law at noon. So John Marshall, of course, one of the great justices of our era, but he's also known as the person who set the Supreme Court as an institution, who decided that the courts will have this role in our system of judicial review. He didn't invent judicial review. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It existed long before John Marshall. The idea that courts can invalidate acts of the legislature. That came long before, but he solidified that role for the U.S. courts. So this decision came 20 years after Marbury versus Madison. And it represented a very big issue for the United States. Why? After the war with England, I think you mentioned this a minute ago, the United States signed a treaty called the Treaty of Paris, which ended the hostilities of the Revolutionary War. And one of the attributes of the Treaty of Paris was that virtually all of Britain's claims to land in the United States were handed over to the U.S. government. All of the claims of land in the United States were handed over to the U.S. government. So think about what happened here, right? Years ago, this land in Illinois, Britain didn't really care about it. It was probably theirs, but they didn't really care. And the Indians sold it. All of a sudden, under the Treaty of Paris, the U.S. Congress gets all of, actually, it's the Articles of Confederation Congress. The Confederation Congress gets all this new land. They don't know what the heck the Indians did. They don't know these sales. So, you know what? We want to expand westward, right? This was the goal of the United States. It's called Manifest Destiny, from sea to shining sea, right, all the way to the coast. They didn't quite know where the coast was at the time, but they had to go there. The problem with this westward expansion, of course, was that there were already people there. There were already people there, the Indians, the natives. So the U.S. government had to figure out a way of colonizing these areas and dealing with the natives. So among anything else, the greatest weapon that the Americans had against the Indians was biological, germ warfare. And this is the part people don't quite appreciate, but the Indians did not have the same sort of vaccinations and immunities to various diseases like smallpox and flies. So as the frontier moved west, deliberately or otherwise, these diseases spread, and they wiped out and weakened entire populations. So much of the slow westward march, so to speak, of the American territories had to do with pushing the Indians back. So this case, beyond anything else, wasn't simply just about property. It really defined the scope of the American boundary. Because imagine the court had ruled otherwise. Right? Imagine the court had ruled for Johnson, that the claim from the Indians was first in time, therefore it's superior. But what would have happened? All of the land that Congress had sold to settlers could have been voided based on prior arrangements from the Indians. The consequence of that, firstly, we're probably in a lot of war. And rather than just expelling the Indians or letting them live there, they will have had to be conquered. So, I'm not trying to justify it, but the alternative could have actually been a little bit worse, but didn't end up very good for the Indians anyway. So this case was a very significant proportion, and it's not surprising it made its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So which would prevail? The claim from the Indians from 1773, or the claims from the United States Congress many years later? Okay. So at the outset of class, I told you that property is going to be weird, right? We don't have a UCC, we don't have a restatement, we don't have a model penal code. So what's your name?
Pierce Jones?
Pierce?
Yes.
Pierce. When a court gets a case, right, how are they supposed to rule on it? What are they supposed to do?
They're supposed to look at various past rules, look at how the court's been going, what the laws are, what conventions are.
Okay,
and
good,
try to
right.
Make a stable decision.
Okay, good. So you look at court cases, you look at maybe statutes, right? You look at precedents. But Pierce, what do you do in a case like this, where there is no statute governing treaties from Indians? There is no case law, right?
You get creative.
You get creative. Be more specific.
You look at various ways property has been acquired and ways that property was not given to people. And you maybe give the, not title and property, but title to the person where you say they were not capable of ever actually having this.
But before we get to the rule, I'm more interested in the how. So, man, what's your name?
Jacqueline McLean.
Jacqueline. What is a court to do when they're faced with this novel issue where, there's no statute in the books? There's no common law precedent. What the heck is a court supposed to do here?
I guess we could look to what Britain did.
What Britain did, so what the common law, what else? Where can we look?
We can look to, besides Britain, other countries who had it.
Yeah. And what's your name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay, where else can we look? How is Chief Justice Marshall the wise jurist that he is supposed to decide this case where we have no statute, we have no case law, there's no book you can open up that says who wins, the Indian or the Congress? There's no clear answer. How do we rule in these sorts of cases?
I think he tries to tie it to the history of how people settled lands, or what people did when they discovered.
Good. Good. So this case, and really the case for Tuesday and the case for the Thursday afterwards, illustrate property at its finest. There's no case law here. You'll do a case in class next week where someone's hunting a whale, and you have two people who are competing. They both hunted the same whale, and they have competing claims to the whale. How to resolve that? You'll have a case next Thursday, a week from today, about hunting foxes on the beach. One guy's hunting the fox with his dogs. At the last minute, this jerk swoops in and kills the fox. Who gets it, right? These are the sorts of cases which we resolve in property without complicated statutes. So as these two said, or as these three people said, the Chief Justice is able to resolve this by looking at different principles, right? He looks to history of conquest and how other nations treated the Indians. He looks at the history of discovery, right? Discovery and conquest are not the same, and how the Americas were first discovered. He also looks to principles of these philosophers, right? Grotius and Pufendorf, these Harry Potter-esque characters who wrote about the acquisition of property, and John Locke, among others. Okay, and then he makes what law students love to call policy arguments about the nature of Indians and their means of property. Right. So he's looking at history, right, at past practice, at these philosophers, and at the policy arguments themselves about how this has been done in the past. And it's based on these things. And there's no clear-cut answer here. There's no statute from Congress saying here's what happens. He reaches this result. And often this is a lesson not just for property, but for any class. Cases often come to judges without a clear answer. More often than not, the cases you read in your case books are there because they're not clear. If this was an easy 9-0 opinion, it wouldn't be in your book. So the precedents a court looks to very often can determine the outcome. Because if Marshall, if Marshall decided to look at other precedents, perhaps the case could come out differently. But these are the ones that he chose to focus on. So it's a nice insight into the window of how the Chief Justices, Roberts and Marshall alike, decide to resolve these sorts of cases. It's going to take me an hour of class. Okay, so let's start walking through the decision. Okay. So, ma'am, what's your name?
Bavara.
What's your name?
Bavara.
Bavara, thank you. So tell me, Bavara, how does, I'm going to say Robert, how does Marshall describe this concept of discovery? How does this discovery doctrine work?
Pretty much discovery is when they come to an unknown land. It's been uninhabited, there's nothing there, and so when they come in, it's kind of like the first person who gets there gets to keep it.
Why do we have this idea of finders keepers, right? If you see something and you're the first person to lay eyes on it, it's yours. Why would we have this rule?
If you're the first person who lays eyes on it, why should you be the first person?
You just restated what I told you. See, law school, right? I'm asking you, why is that the rule? Why is that a good rule? Simply rephrase what I said. I knew you were going to do that too. Why? I mean, common law rules, right? They don't just pop up overnight. These rules have developed by courts over the course of centuries. They think and they refine, they modify. Why would a common law rule of if you discover it, you see it with your eyes first, it's yours? Why is that a good rule?
It would keep other people from trying to take it afterwards.
Oh, what do you mean?
If someone else comes in and says, no, it's mine.
But why do you get it? Why shouldn't the person who came later get it? What's so important about you getting there first?
Kind of like the early bird gets the worm.
Oh, why is that maxim good? Why is that maxim the early bird gets the worm? What is good about the early bird?
It creates competition. Whoever gets there first gets to keep it.
But what about the early bird gets there first?
You're there.
And what about that? Why were you there sooner? You're really close. Why did Columbus get there first? No, before. What's your name, sir?
Sean.
Sean. Why did Columbus get there first?
It was about discovery, about promoting discovery.
Among other explorers, how come Columbus got there first? No, it wasn't luck.
I guess you can trace it back to money. I mean, financial incentive gain. Just
What's your name? I'm sorry.
Hyman.
Jaime. Among all explorers, how come Columbus got there first?
I believe he had the money to go.
Yeah, real close. One more. What's your name?
Crystal.
Crystal.
I don't know. I'm the biggest history loser. I'm so sorry.
No, that's not an answer. Why do you think, among other explorers, you don't need to know history, how come Columbus got there first? It's a really easy answer.
No one else went before.
Yes! No one else had tried doing that before. Exactly, Crystal, you're exactly right. He took a risk. He went a trip that others hadn't gone before. The early bird gets the worm. The reason why we have this rule of first in time, the first person discovers it, is we want to reward creativity. We want to reward risk-taking, right? We want to reward the person who wakes up at the crack of dawn to get his worm, so to speak, right? A lot of property law is about efficiency. How do we encourage people to do good things, right? How do we encourage discoverers to risk their lives to go to sea and sit on a boat, the Nina Pinta in Santa Maria, whatever, for months at end, where their men are dying at sea, because you get rich afterwards, right? There's an incentive. People react to incentives. Because imagine if Columbus got there and discovered it first, and then some other guy came 5 minutes later and said, that's mine. It's gonna be mine. Would anyone bother sailing the ocean blue in 1492 if they can lose it after 5 minutes? No. Right? So you're right on target, right? So that's why basically the idea of when you see something with finders, keepers, heroes, we want to reward people who go and search for stuff. Okay. Now, what's your name?
Brian.
Brian. Okay, thank you, Brian. Now, what happens if after Columbus discovers, the New World, and we're putting aside from that there were people there. Granted, well, just under Marshall's opinion, at least, right? Let's assume that after Columbus discovers the New World, some Italian sailor comes by, or some, British sailor comes by and says, you know what, Chris, it's my land. My land. What's Columbus going to say to him? What's Columbus going to say?
Piss off.
Piss off! I like that. Will Columbus say, I'm going to sue you in court?
Probably.
Really? What court?
Sword.
Sword! Okay, good. Hey, what's your name, man?
Lily.
Lily. Okay, so, some British pirate comes along and says, hey, Columbus, that's my land. And Christopher Columbus says, piss off, right? I don't say that in Spanish, but I'm sure there's a good way, right? What happens when the two of them have this conflict?
Fine.
They fight. And what do we call that when people fight over land? It's one that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, conquest.
Conquest, right? Yeah. So you see, there's like this chronology, right? The first person who gets there sees it as a land ho, discovered, mine. Plant the flag. Why do you think when we went on the moon, right? Neil Armstrong and his buddies, Houston, right? They planted an American flag. That wasn't an act of, whatever. They were laying claim to the moon for the United States of America. Funny fact, though, unfortunately, MTV commercials notwithstanding, due to solar radiation, the flag is totally white. All the pigmentation of the flag has been totally dyed out. So if you ever went to the moon, there'd be a white piece of fabric there. So, what's that? What's that?
Still counts.
Still counts, right? No, in fact, recently Russia had laid claim to this undersea oil reserve. They actually had a submarine go down and plant a Russian flag on the seabed. I mean, there's billions of dollars of oil reserves. So this is actually a legitimate claim of finders keepers. I think the book mentions there's very little undiscovered land on our globe, but undersea stuff counts. Also, occasionally volcanoes pop up new islands, and that's new land. Okay, so they fight, and they have this acquisition by conquest, right? So we have I'll list these here. So we have acquisition by discovery, acquisition by conquest. And again, discovery is, first sight, Whoever sees it first, uninhabited land. Again, the land's inhabited, but we'll come back in a couple minutes. You see uninhabited land, it's yours. And then acquisition by conquest is you fight for it, right? You have some sort of brutal conflict, a war, whatever it is, and whoever the victor is, the terms of the surrender is you get to keep it. Yes, sir.
When you say first sight, is it literally if I can see the property 6
Yeah.
miles away, or is it when I get on the property?
So under traditional discovery is when you see it. Although, not to give it away, we're going to do a case next week involving fox hunting. And the rule is one guy was hunting the fox, he saw it, he was chasing with the dogs, and this other jerk swoops and actually grabs it. And the conflict in that case, who gets the person who sees it, or the person who grabs it. I don't want to spoil it, we'll read that next week, right? But there's not one good rule. But for land, it's basically when you see it, it's been undiscovered, it's yours. The planting the flag is, to rub it in. Literally speaking, okay? So we have the idea of discovery by conquest, discovery by acquisition by discovery, and also we mentioned earlier acquisition by sale, right? That's where you just buy it, and that's the most civil of the interactions, right? Because parties are on mutual terms, right? So we have these three methods of acquisition. And what's your name? Bianca, thank you. Bianca, so in terms of American history, right, the Chief Justice walks us through this and explains how land in the Americas was acquired. So how were the various pieces of property issued here acquired, right? How did the Americans, the Indians, and the Brits, how did they go about arranging their affairs?
Based on who we discovered it first, they would have
Mm-hmm.
they'd have the land and they would either sell it or someone would.
Good. So in the American experience, right, you have a little bit of all three. In some cases, you have the Spanish conquering the Indians. In other cases, you have the Spanish simply saying, land ho, it's ours. And then if the Indians put up a fight, they kill them. And in some cases, like with Johnson, they actually made a treaty and purchased the land. Now, I'm sure you've studied this in various points of your American education, but the Native American concept of ownership was different than the Anglo notion of ownership. So whereas we see ownership as you buy it, it's yours forever, it goes on to your kids and the grandkids and everything else, the Indian notion of property was premised on more like a lease, so to speak, that you would basically rent a piece of property for a hunting season, right? You'd rent it for the hunting season, then you'd move on to some other land for the next hunting season, or whatever it was. So in the various treaties that were negotiated, at least the early ones, the later ones they probably caught on, but in the various treaties, for example, the island of Manhattan, it's often said that it was purchased for $20. The number is entirely made up. It's not even. There's nothing. But there were basically beads and other furs that were sold for a very small quantity of money. To the native population, they weren't selling the island of Manhattan. They were simply renting it for some period of time for hunting. The Dutch settlers obviously did not see it the same way. So to put this in terms of contract, this was not equal bargaining power on both sides. There were risks of coercion, because very often if the Indians did not sign the contracts, they would be killed. So even though there's perhaps no contract, this would at least placate the consciences of those who are the members of the republic who can deal with the natives. But at a minimum, there were at least grants of sale from the natives to some population, for example, Johnson. So, ma'am, what's your name? Jessica. So let's pretend the holding of this case was different, right? Let's pretend the holding was different. Let's pretend that the Indians were able to actually sell the land. Pretend. Who would win this case then if Indians were able to sell the land?
If the Indians were able to sell the land.
If the Indians were
Johnson,
right, if the Indians were able to sell the land, why would Johnson win?
because he acquired title from the
When?
when the Indians came.
Who got it first?
Johnson got it from the Indians.
Why would it matter that he got it first?
First, same principle.
Yes, bingo. First in time, right? Again, if I sell, a piece of property to you on Monday, and I sell a piece of property to you on Tuesday, generally speaking, the person who got it first wins. A little bit more complicated, but that's generally the rule. First in time, right? This is a phrase you'll see over and over and over again in this class. First in time is first in right. The person who claims it first wins. With some caveats or exceptions, but that's the general rule. First in time is first in right. So had Johnson validly acquired the land from the Indians, he would have then been the winner. He won. He got it first. It wouldn't have mattered if Congress, decades later sold it because it wasn't Congress's to give. If Johnson, in fact, owned it, then the British could not have given it to the United States. The Treaty of Paris only included the land owned by the Brits. If Johnson owned it, that was not within the scope of the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. We get that point. So one of the reasons why Marshall's opinion, perhaps by today's standards, is so gratuitous in insulting the Indians was because he had to make it abundantly clear that they could not sell property. Because if they could sell the property, then this case would be an easy 5-sentence opinion. And it was actually a footnote, if you read the footnotes, which you ought to, where Marshall later apologized to Justice Story, another justice of the court, saying, listen, I kind of felt bad about that, but I kind of had to do this because there's only a way to rule. Because the only way to make this case come out the way it did was to effectively compare the Indians to minors, right? You learn from contracts. Can a minor contract? Can a 12-year-old make a contract for the sale of a widget? No, they're incompetent. I mean, that's the term, but they're actually barred by law. So Marshall's task, effectively, was to analogize the Indians to children, people who lack the capacity to make the sale. Because they lacked that capacity, only then could the court later void it. The same way, if your 5-year-old son purports to sell your house, right, and hands someone a deed, a court will say, that's nice, Junior, go home, right? That's this case. In perhaps much more graphic terms, but that's effectively what the court was doing, that these people are not capable of transferring a piece of property the same way your 5-year-old son or daughter would not be able to. Okay. So, sir, what's your name? Jonathan. So how does God, I keep saying Roberts. So the Chief Justice John Roberts, the current Chief Justice of the United States, reveres John Marshall. He has a poster of him on his wall. He probably throws blowy kisses him every morning. And he said how he wants to emulate John Marshall. So I always see them in the same light. I don't like either very much, but for reasons I'm sure I'll tell you throughout the semester. That's why I keep saying John Roberts. So how does John Marshall go about comparing the Indians, these sorts of savages, these people who can't even contract to sell property? How does he go about doing that? Is the seating chart done?
Yeah.
Where is it? Everyone sign it? That's okay. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm asking why.
Yeah, how does John Marshall go about explaining that these native people are these savages, these creatures who can't possibly engage in property? How do you do that?
Do you mean it's because they give that land? They don't really do anything for that land.
Ah, yeah. Go further. Yeah, you're on the right track.
I guess they kind of bring nothing, no benefit to that land. They're just savages.
Very good. Okay. Not that it's good he said this, but you're exactly right. Make no mistake, right? So the argument that John Marshall puts forward is, look, these people are not civilized. That isn't just like an ad hominem attack. There's actually buried under the language is actually a legal argument. And a legal argument is this. They don't do anything with their land, right? They don't build cities. They don't build farms. They don't have a system of property rights. There's no Indian universities. There's no Indian, ports of trade. They're nomads, right? They're scavengers, they're hunters, gatherers, right? Again, peel back whatever vitriol and whatever you don't like about that. But Robert, I'm off today. Yeah, Marshall's point is that these people simply do not have a system of property that warrants a claim to it. Okay. So there's a discussion later on in the reading of a philosopher by the name of John Locke, who looks like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. And John Locke was one of the greatest Enlightenment thinkers of his era. And he tried to articulate a theory of property, right? And Locke said, you know, it's not enough for finders keepers, right? It's not enough that you're the first person to see it. Because look, you have these Indians who are on this land. Okay, they were there first. Granted, they were there first, right? But what are they doing with it? Are they building cities? Are they building, universities? Are they developing trade? No, they're just sitting around hunting. They're not putting enough labor into the land to make something better out of it. So what Locke says, and this is it's called the Locke labor theory, and it's discussed later in the reading. What Locke says is people should acquire property by mixing their labor with the land. By mixing labor with the land. That is, you're not just on the land. You're not just, sitting there and, hunting whatever, but you're actually doing something with the land. So the point, what's your name, answer?
Jonathan.
So the point Jonathan raised was Marshall's idea. Now look, these people are savages. They don't have a system of property by which they've actually earned the right to keep it. They have not acquired and developed a system of property rights consistent with the Anglo view that warrants their keeping of this land. Yes, ma'am? What's your name?
Jail.
Jail?
Yeah. So what about, how do they view the cultivation of the land and the domestication of animals and redistricting of where their tribes would settle and where they could go?
So Marshall's history is wrong. Marshall's history is wrong. So I asked you also to read the Dempsets article, right? So what's your name? Cody. In the Dempsets article, which comes later in the reading, what traits, we'll come back to Johnson D'Ori, I'll come back to it. But in the Dempsets article, what traits of property rights did the natives develop? How did they develop property rights? And you alluded to it a minute ago. What did the Indians do to cultivate property rights?
I read the article, but I don't really know what you mean. It's the one about externalities and whatnot?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question, right? So imagine these are hunters, right? They did not really have agriculture. Let's just say they were hunters. They hunted for animals to get fur. That was like the big deal. They wanted fur. What do you think a problem would arise if you have lots of hunters all trying to compete to hunt for fur?
You have like the tragedy of the commons.
Ah, beautiful. What's the tragedy of the commons?
Where it benefits each person individually to overuse the resources so that other people don't have it.
Okay, exactly right. And so what's your name to the right?
Sure.
Jeremy. Okay, so let's say there's a piece of land, that make it easy, there are 100 buffaloes in that piece of land. And let's say that there are 10 different tribes hunting that land, right? If you're in one of those tribes and you know that there are only 100 buffaloes left for the season, what are you going to do?
Well, you could, I guess, hunt the buffaloes so other people can.
Are you going to try and save some buffalo so every tribe gets 10 buffalo?
You don't care about them.
You don't give a damn. Piss off, right? Piss off. You don't care about the other tribes. So this is the tragedy of the commons. When you have a common, when you have a number of buffalo that everyone can get to, you have every incentive to kill as many damn buffalo as you can, so the other guy gets nothing, and you get all these buffalo. It's awesome. Now, that's not a very efficient method of hunting because you deplete the source, right? And next season, there's going to be nothing left to reproduce. So you're actually making yourself worse off in the future. So what's your name? Carl. So what, in the Dempsets article, what did the native tribes in modern-day Canada do to combat that tragedy of the commons? Good. How? How'd they do that? Very specific. You're exactly right, but they did something very specific to prevent that sort of overhunting. I already called you, so I'll go up. So what's your name in the back? What there? Yeah. Sam? So in the Dempsey's article, what did the Indians do to prevent this overhunting of the bison? Not just trade. What did they do? Yeah.
They mark trees.
They mark trees. What do they mark the trees for? Yeah. So you guys are from Texas, right? Branding. Everyone know what branding is, right? Every ranch has its own symbol. And you stamp on the steers behind your symbol. So that way, if the cow wanders off, or someone, God forbid, is a cattle thief, is that still a hanging offense? I think it may be, although I don't know if that's ever actually implemented, right? If someone steals your steer, look, that's my brand. So the Indians actually developed a system of branding where they marked different sections of the forest that would burn into the tree, a crest saying, look, this is my tribe's area, that's your tribe's area, we're going to hunt here, you guys are going to hunt there, we're going to keep it for ourselves. This is a sophisticated property system, right? They were trying to combat this tragedy of the commons. And the way you combat the tragedy of the commons is by identifying property rights. Saying this is ours, that's yours, we negotiate, we shake hands on it, and that's there. So to your question before, I can't remember your name, what's your name again? JL. JL's question was exactly right. How can John Marshall say that these Indians are savages, that they have no property right system? He was wrong in his history. At the very time, you raised your hand or no? Okay, that's okay. At the very time that the court was writing that these people had no system of property rights, they'd actually developed pretty sophisticated boundaries. I mean, yeah, look, this is not like, you know, some sort of formal property system with a code and cases, but it doesn't matter. They had something. And this is why I signed the Dempsey's article out of order, because I know at the exact point in this discussion, someone's going to raise that question, and it's 40 pages too late, right? So that's why I signed it earlier. Yeah. What's your name again?
Cody.
Cody, yes.
Like in the defense of that kind of view, though, you're talking about how smallpox killed so many people. A lot of times when they went to what was once a village, there would just be a few dozen people starving to death because they could no longer make their own crops. They could no longer keep track of their own animals because the number of people that had died. So I think these people really believed that because from their personal observation, that was true.
Right. So I think a lot of it was premised on this notion of the savages as basically these children. And this is a common theme that recurs as you sort of warlike children that aren't able to think for themselves. Because, I mean, imagine, look, you have these European settlers who come, you know, they have universities, they have, you know, government, they have parliament, they have all these institutions, and they see people who are, you know, they don't dress like them, they don't talk like them, they don't have the same sort of institutions, and they simply see, wow, these are savages, right? These are people who are not worthy of our institutions, right? These are not people who are worthy of our system of property laws, okay? Indeed, the Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances that Thomas Jefferson wrote was that the King of England allowed the savages, these heathens, to attack us on our frontiers. So this was a very common sentiment at the time, right? So we have this notion of first in time, of this kind of labor theory, but these Indians are not capable of living there. Okay. Now, so what's your name?
Adam.
Adam. So does that mean, though, that the Indians in Illinois have to leave?
Well, I believe, didn't he talk about how the Europeans, you know, they claimed title to the land, they still gave them rights to it?
How can this be? How can it be that at the same time Macintosh owns the land, the Indians can stay there? Sir, what's your name? Sir, Thomas, how can that be? How can that be? How can someone own land and let someone else live there? Is that crazy?
Well, even though it was their land first, maybe they could just use it.
Ah, how many of you rent a piece of property you don't own? I don't know, right? This is an important concept of property rights, right? When I say I own something, that's people say, oh, I own this land, right? That's really vague. There are different levels of property. You may be leasing someone. I'm sorry. You own it, you lease it to her, and she subleases it, right? 3 people all have some sort of claim to the land. None of them own it in their entirety, because even though she's the owner, she's a lessee, and she's a sublessee. And she can't kick her out for nothing. She has a lease to it. So what the court identifies is you have this sort of right of ownership, and also you have this right of possession. And the natives, right, the Indians, even though they didn't have the ownership, right, they didn't actually have the title to the land themselves, they still had the possession, or maybe you can say occupancy, right? They could stay there. They weren't being expelled. Yeah, that would come later. But they had this right of occupancy. So this, in many respects, was how the American experiment dealt with the Indians. They said, listen, they're savages. They don't own it, right? They don't own this vast tract of land. But for the most part, who cares, right? It's wilderness. We're not going to even bump into them. So they can stay there until we settle, we conquer, and we disease and everything else. Then we deal with it later. But the idea was, let's avoid these massive wars now. We'll sign these treaties, let them stay there. But they don't own it. And in some respects, the Indians didn't really have a sense of ownership either. They understood leases. So this was actually closer to perhaps what they understood. Okay? Is everyone with me so far? So the court's decision, if I can summarize a little bit, right? They say, look, you can acquire land by sale, you can acquire land by conquest, you can acquire land by a discovery. And even then, even though the Indians don't own it, they can maintain their right of possession for it. But because these Indians are these savages, these people who have no property institutions, they are not worthy of the sorts of property rights that we've created. They're not worthy of them. Therefore, like a child, a 5-year-old, a minor who tries to contract a piece of land, they cannot do so. Right? This is based on the character and the habits of their people, the history of how the European nations have dealt with the Indians, based on these abstract principles, no statutes, these abstract principles. The court rules that these people are not competent to transfer title to land. They are but fierce savages, the court says. These are a people with whom it was impossible to mix. They can't be assimilated into our culture. They're merely occupants, and they're capable of transferring title to others. Okay. All right. Everyone get the holding in Johnson. Any questions in Johnson? No? Okay. So let's dwell a little bit more on this idea of first in time, first in right. And the book discusses these 2 philosophers, and you'll hear from them again. They're mentioned in the case next week, Pearson v. Post. So the first one I want you to learn about was a guy named Hugo Grotius. He was a Dutch philosopher. And the second guy, again, his name is Samuel Pufendorf. It's spelled differently. It sounds like one of the houses from Harry Potter. But these were natural rights and natural law theorists who tried to articulate a reason why you take property based on ownership. And these philosophers actually envisioned history as a function of property. So imagine, again, evolution wasn't known yet, right? So we'll put evolution aside for the moment. Let's say at the dawn of man, people were running around everywhere. There was no law. There was no order. Okay? And what's your name? Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. So imagine, right? It's a dawn of man. People running around like crazy, and there's animals, and there's people trying to hunt. What are you going to try to do for yourself? If there's people running around, what's your first instinct, Nancy? You're in the state of nature where it's crazy. There's no government to protect you. Seek shelter. Why are you seeking shelter? What's your number one interest? What are you looking out for? Numero uno, right? Right, in this state of nature, your first instinct is self-preservation, and you're going to try and defend yourself. So you said you're going to try and seek shelter, right? You're going to try and find, a cave, I don't know, right? And that's going to be your shelter. And what's your name?
Lola.
Lola. So what happens if, Nancy finds her cave, and you're like, man, that's an awesome cave. Get out. Scram, Nancy. I want that shelter. I want the protection. What are you going to do to Nancy? You have nothing. You're in a state of nature. There's nothing. What are you going to offer her? Give her a different cave? She needs to. If she's not in that cave, she's going to freeze to death. What are you going to do if you see her in that cave? How are you going to try and take it from her? And you can be graphic. It's obvious. You know where I'm going with this. Kill her. Yes. You're too nice, Lola. Right. Kill her. Right, in this sort of state of nature where it's man against man, woman against woman, right? You're looking out for your own survival. If Nancy has the cave and then Lola wants the cave, one of them is going to die. Or maybe they'll both die, I don't know. At least one of them will die. Perhaps from wounds, but she'll die in her cave, right? And then let's say Lola, awesome Lola, this prize fighter knocks out Nancy, right? What's your name, man? Camille comes along and is like, oh no, that's my cave, and now you're weak, I'm going to knock you out. What happens when Camille kills Lola? Who has the cave now? And then, right. So this goes on and on and on, right? And this is not a particularly effective means of structuring a society, right? This is not an effective means of structuring society because everyone dies over a stupid cave. So Camille, what's an alternative to the three of you just killing each other for the stupid cave? What's an alternative? No. It's only room for one person. It's a small cave. This is a tiny cave. You don't want them messing with the cave. You ever see the Flintstones? It's all messy down there. You don't want. What do you do? What can the three of you do rather than killing each other? No one dies, right? Short of murder, what can the three of you do to prevent this sort of anarchy, this chaos? Oh, what do you mean alliance? What's this alliance? Good, but what do you mean alliance? Help each other. What do you call that when people come together and form an alliance to make certain rules? What do you call that? What do you call that? Yeah. Samantha, what do we call that? Rules. What do we call that? When people form rules for each other that they bind. What? Government. Yes, government. Government. Right? You ever think of why we have a government? You ever think of why we have rules? Now, this is probably not historically accurate. This probably never happened. But let's pretend for a moment, right? What Pufendorf and Grotius and others assume is that governments were created in this state of nature to protect property rights, to prevent bloodshed. Governments were created in this state of nature to avoid the sort of bloodshed that results. And why were governments created in the first order? To protect property. So that Lola and Nancy don't kill each other for a cave. So that if Nancy wants the cave and Lola wants it more, Lola can pay her for it, right? And then if for whatever reason Nancy decides not to leave after she gets paid, you have a court to adjudicate the question. You have a sheriff who can evict Nancy from the cave. You have a government that can pass rules saying how evictions occur, right? All of the foundations of government, and I don't say this as a biased person, but all the foundations of government are at bottom are protecting property rights. Sure, contract and torts, it's all about property, right? You're acquiring stuff you have. But according to these philosophers, again, this is not historically accurate. This never happened, right? It never happened that a bunch of caveman walkers said, hey, let's make a government, right? This evolved over the course of millennia. Institutions developed for the express purpose of finding ways to prevent that bloodshed, and resolve this through a legal manner. Indeed, the entire case of Johnson, right? Johnson and McIntosh didn't draw out their swords and duel over this. They didn't shoot each other. They followed a court case. They went through the channels of government. They said, we're going to the court. Let's see what the court decides. The court ruled for McIntosh. Johnson didn't get his gun and say, John Marshall, I'm going to kill you, right? He said, all right, piss off, I lost. But, I lost. That's why I have a lid on this. My very first day of teaching ever, I didn't have a lid. I had one of these Nalgene's, and I knocked over the entire bottle all over the place. It's on YouTube. You can find it. It's on. It's all on video too. There's water everywhere. I knocked over my laptop. It was bad. First 5 minutes of teaching in South Texas. So I now have this lid. That's why I learned my lesson, because I knocked stuff over. But the idea is governments were created to protect property rights. That's why they were instituted. Locke, Grotius, Pufendorf, they all more or less, not exactly, they're all in the same ballpark on this. And then once you decide to have a system of government to protect property rights, you have different rules, right? Do you give it to the first in time person right? The person who sees it first, is it finders keepers? Does a person who sees the fox first get it, even if he doesn't actually hunt it and capture it? Or do you have an acquisition by capture rule, right? The person who actually occupies it first, captures the fox first, who gets it? Or is the person who invests the most labor into the hunt, the person who spends all the time hunting? These are different rules. And no single rule is implicitly correct, right? These are not self-evident truths. They're based on different values. Do you want to reward efficiency? Do you want to reward certainty? Do you want to reward people who go out and hunt, or like Christopher Columbus who goes out and discovers and risks everything? These are different values by which property decisions are made. And they really will define probably the first half of this class about who wins when two people claim a right to the same piece of property. All right. So questions on that? Nothing else? That's actually all I have for today. Have a wonderful day. I will see you all on Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Hey, Professor, just to clarify, so we're starting class at 9:30? Or was that just a joke?
No, that was serious. 9:30. I'll see you all at 9:30 on Tuesday. We're starting class at 9:30, not 9. Don't be late now. Not a joke.